In the old house on the hill, baby Kochamma sat at the dining table, rubbing the thick, frothy bitterness out of an elderly cucumber. She was wearing a limp, checked, seersucker nightgown with puffed sleeves and yellow turmeric stains. Under the table, she swung her tiny, manicured feet like a small child on a high chair. They were puffy with edema, like little foot-shaped air cushions. In the old days, whenever anybody visited Imenem, baby Kochamma made it a point to call attention to their large feet. She would ask to try on their slippers and say, "Look, how big for me they are." Then, she would walk around the house in them, lifting her sari a little so that everybody could marvel at her tiny feet. She worked on the cucumber with an air of barely concealed triumph. She was delighted that Esther had not spoken to Rahel. That he had looked at her and walked straight past into the rain, as he did with everyone else. She was 83. Her eyes spread like butter behind her thick glasses. "I told you, didn't I?" she said to Rahel. "What did you expect? Special treatment? He's lost his mind, I'm telling you. He doesn't recognize people anymore. What did you think?" Rahel said nothing. She could feel the rhythm of Esther's rocking and the wetness of rain on his skin. She could hear the raucous, scrambled world inside his head. Baby Kochamma looked up at Rahel uneasily. Already, she regretted having written to her about Esther's return. But then, what else could she have done? Had him on her hands for the rest of her life. Why should she? He wasn't her responsibility. Or was he? The silence sat between grandniece and baby Grandaunt like a third person. A stranger, swollen, noxious. Baby Kochamma reminded herself to lock her bedroom door at night. She tried to think of something to say. "How'd you like my bob?" With her cucumber hand, she touched her new haircut. She left a riveting, bitter blob of cucumber froth behind. Rahel could think of nothing to say. She watched baby Kochamma peel her cucumber. Yellow slivers of cucumber skin flecked her bosom. Her hair, dyed jet black, was arranged across her scalp like unspooled thread. The dye had stained the skin on her forehead a pale gray, giving her a shadowy second hairline. Rahel noticed that she had started wearing makeup. Lipstick, kohl. A sly touch of rouge. And because the house was locked and dark, and because she only believed in 40-watt bulbs, her lipstick mouth had shifted slightly off her real mouth. She had lost weight on her face and shoulders, which had turned her from being a round person into a conical person. But sitting at the dining table, with her enormous hips concealed, she managed to look almost fragile. The dim dining room light had rubbed the wrinkles off her face, leaving it looking in a strange, sunken way younger. She was wearing a lot of jewelry. Rahel's dead grandmother's jewelry, all of it. Winking rings, diamond earrings, gold bangles, and a beautifully crafted, flat gold chain that she touched from time to time, reassuring herself that it was there and that it was hers. Like a young bride who couldn't believe her good fortune. She's living her life backwards, Rahel thought. It was a curiously apt observation. Baby Kochamma had lived her life backwards. As a young woman, she had renounced the material world. And now, as an old one, she seemed to embrace it. She hugged it, and it hugged her back. When she was 18, baby Kochamma fell in love with a handsome, young, Irish monk, Father Mulligan, who was in Kerala for a year on deputation from his seminary in Madras. He was studying Hindu scriptures in order to be able to denounce them intelligently. Every Thursday morning, Father Mulligan came to Imenem to visit baby Kochamma's father, Reverend John Epe, who was a priest of the Marthoma Church. Reverend Epe was well known in the Christian community as the man who had been blessed personally by the Patriarch of Antioch, the sovereign head of the Syrian Christian Church. An episode that had become a part of Imanum's folklore. In 1876, when baby Kochamma's father was 7 years old, his father had taken him to see the Patriarch, who was visiting the Syrian Christians of Kerala. They found themselves right in front of a group of people whom the Patriarch was addressing in the westernmost veranda of the colony house in Cochin. Seizing his opportunity, his father whispered in his young son's ear and propelled the little fellow forward. The future reverend, skidding on his heels, rigid with fear, applied his terrified lips to the ring on the Patriarch's middle finger, leaving it wet with spit. The Patriarch wiped his ring on his sleeve and blessed the little boy. Long after, he grew up and became a priest. Reverend Epe continued to be known as Punyan Kanj, which means little blessed one. And people came down the river in boats, all the way from Aleppi and Ernakulam, with children, to be blessed by him. Though there was a considerable age difference between Father Mulligan and Reverend Epe, and though they belonged to different denominations of the church, both men enjoyed each other's company. And more often than not, Father Mulligan would be invited to stay for lunch. Of the two men, only one recognized the sexual excitement that rose like a tide in the slender girl who hovered around the table long after lunch had been cleared away. At first, baby Kochamma tried to seduce Father Mulligan with weekly exhibitions of staged charity. Every Thursday morning, just when Father Mulligan was due to arrive, baby Kochamma force-bathed a poor village child at the well with hard red soap that hurt its protruding ribs. "Morning, Father," baby Kochamma would call out when she saw him, with a smile on her lips that completely belied the vice-like grip that she had on the thin child's soap-slippery arm. "Morning to you, baby," Father Mulligan would say, stopping and folding his umbrella. "There's something I wanted to ask you, Father," baby Kochamma would say. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23, it says, "All things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient." "Father, how can all things be lawful unto him?" "I mean, I can understand if some things are lawful unto him, but..." Father Mulligan was more than merely flattered by the emotion he aroused in the attractive young girl who stood before him with a trembling kissable mouth and blazing, coal-black eyes. For he was young too, and perhaps not wholly unaware that the solemn explanations with which he dispelled her bogus biblical doubts were completely at odds with the thrilling promise he held out in his effulgent, emerald eyes. Every Thursday, undaunted by the merciless midday sun, they would stand there by the well. The young girl and the intrepid Jesuit, both quaking with unchristian passion, using the Bible as a ruse to be with each other. Invariably, in the middle of their conversation, the unfortunate soapy child that was being force-bathed would manage to slip away, and Father Mulligan would snap back to his senses and say, "Oops, we'd better catch him before a cold does." Then he would reopen his umbrella and walk away in chocolate robes and comfortable sandals, like a high-stepping camel with an appointment to keep. He had young baby Kochamma's aching heart on a leash, bumping behind him, lurching over leaves and small stones. Bruised and almost broken. A whole year of Thursdays went by. Eventually, the time came for Father Mulligan to return to Madras. Since charity had not produced any tangible results, the distraught young baby Kochamma invested all her hope in faith, displaying a stubborn single-mindedness. Baby Kochamma defied her father's wishes and became a Roman Catholic. With special dispensation from the Vatican, she took her vows and entered a convent in Madras as a trainee novice. She hoped somehow that this would provide her with legitimate occasion to be with Father Mulligan. She pictured them together in dark sepulchral rooms with heavy velvet drapes discussing theology. That was all she wanted. All she ever dared to hope for. Just to be near him. Close enough to smell his beard, to see the coarse weave of his cassock, to love him just by looking at him. Very quickly, she realized the futility of this endeavor. She found that the senior sisters monopolized the priests and bishops with biblical doubts more sophisticated than hers would ever be, and that it might be years before she got anywhere near Father Mulligan. She grew restless and unhappy in the convent. She developed a stubborn allergic rash on her scalp from the constant chafing of her wimple. She felt she spoke much better English than everybody else. This made her lonelier than ever. Within a year of her joining the convent, her father began to receive puzzling letters from her in the mail. "My dearest Papa, I am well and happy in the service of Our Lady. But Kohanua appears to be unhappy and homesick. My dearest Papa, today, Kohanua vomited after lunch and is running a temperature. My dearest Papa, convent food does not seem to suit Kohanua, though I like it well enough. My dearest Papa, Kohanua is upset because her family seems to neither understand nor care about her well-being. Other than the fact that it was the name of the world's biggest diamond, Reverend John Epe knew of no other Kohanua. He wondered how a girl with a Muslim name had ended up in a Catholic convent. It was baby Kochamma's mother who eventually realized that Kohanua was none other than baby Kochamma herself. She remembered that, long ago, she had shown baby Kochamma a copy of her father's will in which, describing his grandchildren, he had written, "I have 7 jewels, one of which is my Kohanua." He went on to bequeath little bits of money and jewelry to each of them, never clarifying which one he considered his Kohanua. Baby Kochamma's mother realized that baby Kochamma, for no reason that she could think of, had assumed that he had meant her. And all those years later, at the convent, knowing that all her letters were read by the Mother Superior before they were posted, had resurrected Kohanua to communicate her troubles to her family. Reverend Epe went to Madras and withdrew his daughter from the convent. She was glad to leave, but insisted that she would not reconvert, and for the rest of her days, remained a Roman Catholic. Reverend Epe realized that his daughter had by now developed a reputation, and was unlikely to find a husband. He decided that, since she couldn't have a husband, there was no harm in her having an education. So he made arrangements for her to attend a course of study at the University of Rochester in America. 2 years later, baby Kochamma returned from Rochester with a diploma in ornamental gardening, but more in love with Father Mulligan than ever. There was no trace of the slim, attractive girl that she had been. In her years at Rochester, baby Kochamma had grown extremely large. In fact, let it be said, obese. Even timid little Chalapan Taylor at Chungam Bridge insisted on charging bush shirt rates for her sari blouses. To keep her from brooding, her father gave baby Kochamma charge of the front garden of the Imenham house, where she raised a fierce, bitter garden that people came all the way from Kottayam to see. It was a circular, sloping patch of ground with a steep, gravel driveway looping around it. Baby Kochamma turned it into a lush maze of dwarf hedges, rocks and gargoyles. The flower she loved the most was the anthurium. Anthurium andrinum. She had a collection of them, the rubrum, the honeymoon, and a host of Japanese varieties. Their single, succulent spathes ranged from shades of mottled black to blood red and glistening orange. Their prominent, stippled spadices, always yellow. In the center of baby Kochamma's garden was surrounded by beds of Canaan phlox, a marble cherub peed an endless silver arc into a shallow pool in which a single blue lotus bloomed. At each corner of the pool lolled a pink, plaster of Paris gnome with rosy cheeks and a peaked red cap. Baby Kochamma spent her afternoons in her garden, in sari and gum boots. She wielded an enormous pair of head shears in her bright orange gardening gloves. Like a lion tamer, She tamed twisting vines and nurtured bristling cacti. She limited bonsai plants and pampered rare orchids. She waged war on the weather. She tried to grow edelweiss and Chinese guava. Every night, she creamed her feet with real cream and pushed back the cuticles on her toenails. Recently, after enduring more than half a century of relentless, pernickety attention, the ornamental garden had been abandoned. Left to its own devices, it had grown knotted and wild. Like a circus whose animals had forgotten their tricks. The weed, that people call communist parcha, smothered the more exotic plants. Only the vines kept growing, like toenails on a corpse. They reached through the nostrils of the pink plaster gnomes and blossomed in their hollow heads, giving them an expression, half surprised, half sneeze coming. The reason for this sudden, unceremonious dumping was a new love. Baby Kochamma had installed a dish antenna on the roof of the Imenem house. She presided over the world in her drawing room on satellite TV. The impossible excitement that this engendered in baby Kochamma wasn't hard to understand. It wasn't something that happened gradually. It happened overnight. Blondes, wars, famines, football, sex, music, coups. They all arrived on the same train. They unpacked together. They stayed at the same hotel. And in Imenem, where once the loudest sound had been a musical bus horn, now whole wars, famines, picturesque massacres, and Bill Clinton could be summoned up like servants. And so, while her ornamental garden wilted and died, baby Kochamma followed American NBA League games, one-day cricket, and all the Grand Slam tennis tournaments. On weekdays, she watched The Bold and the Beautiful and Santa Barbara, where brittle blondes, with lipstick and hairstyles, rigid with spray, seduced androids, and defended their sexual empires. Baby Kochamma loved their shiny clothes and the smart, bitchy repartee. During the day, disconnected snatches of it came back to her and made her chuckle. Kochamma, the cook, still wore the thick gold earrings that had disfigured her earlobes forever. She enjoyed the WWF Wrestling Mania shows, where Hulk Hogan and Mr. Perfect, whose necks were wider than their heads, wore spangled lycra leggings, and beat each other up brutally. Kochamma's laugh had that slightly cruel ring to it that young children sometimes have. All day, they sat in the drawing room. Baby Kochamma, on the long-armed planter's chair, or the chaise longue. Kochamma, next to her on the floor. Locked together, in a noisy television silence. One's hair, snow white, and the other's dyed coal black. They entered all the contests, availed themselves of all the discounts that were advertised, and had, on 2 occasions, won a t-shirt and a thermos flask that baby Kochamma kept locked away in her cupboard. Baby Kochamma loved the Imenem house and cherished the furniture that she had inherited by outliving everybody else. Mamachi's violin and violin stand, the Udi cupboards, the plastic basket chairs, the deli beds, the dressing table from Vienna, with cracked ivory knobs. The rosewood dining table that Voluta made. She was frightened by the BBC famines and television war that she encountered while she channel surfed. Her old fears of the revolution and the Marxist-Leninist menace had been rekindled by new television worries about the growing numbers of desperate and dispossessed people. She viewed ethnic cleansing, famine and genocide as direct threats to her furniture. She kept her doors and windows locked, unless she was using them. She used her windows for specific purposes. For a breath of fresh air. To pay for the milk. To let out a trapped wasp. She even locked her sad, paint-flaking fridge, where she kept her week's supply of cream buns that Kochamma brought her from Best Bakery in Kottayam. And the 2 bottles of rice water that she drank instead of ordinary water. On the shelf, below the baffle tray, she kept what was left of Mamachi's willow-pattern dinner service. She put the dozen or so bottles of insulin that Rahel brought her in the cheese and butter compartment. She suspected that, these days, even the innocent and the round-eyed could be crockery crooks, or cream bun cravers, or thieving diabetics, cruising Imenem for imported insulin. She didn't even trust the twins. She deemed them capable of anything. Anything at all. They might even steal their present back, she thought, and realized with a pang, how quickly she had reverted to thinking of them, as though they were a single unit once again after all those years. Determined not to let the past creep up on her, she altered her thought at once. She might steal her present back. She looked at Rahel, standing at the dining table, and noticed the same eerie stealth, the ability to keep very still and very quiet, that Esther seemed to have mastered. Baby Kochamma was a little intimidated by Rahel's quietness. So, she said, her voice shrill, faltering. What are your plans? How long will you be staying? Have you decided? Rahel tried to say something. It came out jaded, like a piece of tin. She walked to the window and opened it, for a breath of fresh air. Shut it when you finish with it, Baby Kochamma said, and closed her face like a cupboard.